Welcome to this first session in the Education and Presentation series from our High Yearly Meeting on the document A Brief Synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Society of Friends. We're joined by Conrad, Lindes and Henry Jason from our High Yearly Meeting. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Conrad to start the meeting off.
I'm going to give some very general background, and then Henry can pick up from there. Quoting from John chapter 21, verse 25. And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. A lot of times people will ask me, well, what should I read to know more about what Quakers believe, what they think, how they should live? And for those of you who have done any research on the topic, there are whole libraries of what Quakers have written based on their experience of Christ in their lives and in the world. What we're trying to do with this session on the brief synopsis is to set down clearly where Ohio Yearly Meeting and other conservative yearly meetings stand on various issues, especially theological issues, so that we know what the common ground is that we're all standing on when we call ourselves conservative friends. So that's the starting point, why this brief synopsis was written and why we're doing this presentation, to try to, rather than wander off onto various tangents, this is what George Fox said, this is what William Penn said, this is what John Woolman said. We're going to go back to this is what Ohio Yearly Meeting has said. And even though it was a while ago, this is the last time we have seen the need to write down such a clear explanation. So with that, I give it to you, Henry.
Thanks, Conrad. I don't want to go into much history here, but I think I do need to say a couple of things. As you probably know, the Quaker movement began in the 17th century in England, and it continued and spread to places like North America and Africa especially. However, in the 19th century, there were two major schisms, two major breakups of Friends. One is called the Hicksite separation, which took place in 1827 and 28. There'll be references to this in this work in terms of why this work is emphasizing certain points. Again, I don't want to go so much into the history of and theology of what that was about, but then later on, another 10, 20 years later, there was another major breakup among Friends, and that was, with the Hicksite separation, Elias Hicks, you had what were then called the Hicksites and the Orthodox. Some years later, the Orthodox broke up. A major break happened with Joseph John Gurney, who was proposing some very different kind of theology than was there with Friends up to this point. He had a profound influence because he was a very powerful speaker and he was a prolific writer. But there were those among Friends who really were concerned about that change that he was proposing. One was John Wilbur, and John Wilbur felt we should conserve the original beliefs, the original doctrines, teachings, principles of Friends. Those people are now called conservatives or Wilburites because we are trying to hold on to what were the basic spiritual and religious insights of those earliest Friends. What you see here as we go into talking about this title, I think maybe I don't know if there's anything else I need to say here at this point, because we'll probably talk more about the history as points come up in this document. Perhaps we should just have Daniel read the title here, this page, first page.
A brief synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Society of Friends, with minutes of adoption from the yearly meetings of New England, Canada, Ohio, Western, Iowa, Kansas, and North Carolina, adopted in 1912, issued in 1913. So, Henry, did you want to say anything about the immediate context for why this came about?
Before I even say that, let's just a couple of things here in the very title. This is a brief synopsis. I want to emphasize brief here because it's only 31 pages, and the work refers to works like Berkeley's Apology, which can be 400, 500 pages, depending on your edition, as well as other works that it approves of among early friends. This work, this brief synopsis, was adopted by these 7 yearly meetings. These were conservative yearly meetings, Wilburite yearly meetings at the time it was adopted in 1912. Unfortunately, today there are only 3 of them left: Ohio, Iowa, and North Carolina. The other meetings either joined with liberal meetings or were laid down, ended, in other words. So what you see here is what was approved of by those yearly meetings in 1912 and then published in 1913. I will be having copies made of the reprint of this work. It's just a short 31-page work, and I'll have these available for people in the future. But it also, I should say, this work is also online at the moment on the ohioyearlymeeting.org website. If you go to that website, you will find that if you click on what is called printed material up on the top line, click on that, you will then find the work below, the brief synopsis. What I had done also at one point was to create a table of contents for that work so that you could more easily find specific topics that were presented in this work. Conrad, is there anything else that needs to be added here?
Well, just thinking back to the reason it was adopted in 1912 and issued in 1913 is because as we read further, we'll find out that there was a convocation, so to speak, of representatives from these 7 yearly meetings who came together and drafted the document. And then the document was submitted to each of the yearly meetings for each one's approval. And then upon that approval, it went back to another meeting, which actually went about publishing it. So the process of doing that, the things having to go through the mail and not online and so on and so forth, is why there's a year difference there.
I also forgot to mention, perhaps one of the impetuses for this document was that a number of years before, in 1887, there was something called the Richmond Declaration, which was a document that those Gurneyite meetings approved of as to what their doctrines are, how they understood their Christian faith. And that's called the Richmond Declaration because it was approved of, it was founded, approved of in Richmond, Indiana in 1887. Also, in 1895 in England, there was the Manchester Conference, which again perhaps was a reaction to that earlier 1887 document by those in what was then called London Yearly Meeting, now Britain Yearly Meeting. So what we have here in 1912 is a type of further clarification among these people who formed these now conservative or Wilburite meetings as to what their basic beliefs were. So again, this is, I want to emphasize, this is a brief synopsis. Sometimes, again, it was written for conservative friends to understand what their basic beliefs were. So we might go into much more detail at certain points because I think at times in this work, they are emphasizing things just because they are speaking to those other separated friends or Quakers as to how they wish to conserve the original Quaker beliefs.
So the document starts off with some minutes on behalf of the Conference of Representatives, which I shall read now. At a conference of representatives from the Meetings for Sufferings of the yearly meetings of the Religious Society of Friends in America in correspondence with each other, held at Stillwater near Barnesville, Ohio, the 27th of 9th month, 1911, with delegates present from 5 of these yearly meetings. This conference was called for the purpose of considering the propriety of the joint publication in concise form by these yearly meetings of our belief in the doctrines of the gospel as professed, practiced, and promulgated by our early friends. After deliberate and weighty consideration and the harmonious interchange of opinions and expression of feelings, we were united in offering the following brief synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Society of Friends to the above-mentioned Meeting for Sufferings, viz. New England, Canada, Ohio, Western, Iowa, Kansas, and North Carolina, for their consideration and approval. Signed by direction and on behalf of the conference, Jesse Egerton Clark.
I'm just going to comment again on the process. Meetings for Sufferings, now we call a representative meeting. It's a group of individuals who represented the various monthly meetings who got together when a yearly meeting was not in session in order to handle items of business that needed to be dealt with. And then again, the meeting, the clerk's role is to write down what he or she believes the people present are in unity with, and when that unity is affirmed by those present, then the clerk signs on behalf of the group. So the clerk is not a leader. He doesn't set the agenda very much, but he's one that records what the Lord revealed through the people there.
This group called the Meetings for Sufferings goes right back to the very first century of Friends. And these were, one of their primary functions was to speak to government officials about the oppression happening to Friends. And that's why you have this word sufferings, Meetings for Sufferings. An important word here that will come up again and again in this next section that we will be reading today is in correspondence with each other. That's an important phrase, in correspondence. That meant that basically they saw each other's basic beliefs as being the same. They would be corresponding with each other. Their beliefs, their testimonies, their principles were the same. So when they say in correspondence with each other, they would be writing to each other and with the understanding that they were speaking to the same group of friends, friends who are conservative, are Wilburite. There was another word here. Oh, yes, after deliberate and weighty consideration. That word weighty is very important in Friends' writings. It has to do with those who are weighty friends, those who have had a perhaps deeper spiritual experience, are more able in terms of the gifts that the Lord has given them to express what needs to be said. Deliberate here means in terms of deliberation, after in terms of, it's not deliberate in the more modern sense. This is an important point I want to make now, that throughout this document, the King James Version of the Bible was the most commonly used English translation of the Bible. However, that Bible was translated way back at the beginning of the 17th century, 1611 or so. And the English language has changed considerably in many ways, especially with regard to specific words. There are words that are perhaps what we call linguistically false friends. The words exist in modern English, but the meaning or meanings may have changed from what they were originally in the 17th century. So we always have to be careful in understanding words and reading the King James Version, as well as how friends, conservative Wilburite friends, were using the English language with those kinds of understandings that are not typical of other groups speaking modern English. So that's why I want to make that point here, because it will come up again and again.
So the next section of the document is the series of minutes made by the individual yearly meetings. And if I read the first one, and then Henry and Conrad can comment on that. Minutes of the New England Yearly Meeting. At New England Yearly Meeting of Friends held at Westerly, Rhode Island, commencing with a public meeting for worship on first day, the 9th of 6th month, 1912, and on second day, the 10th, with a meeting for discipline. The essay entitled A Synopsis of the Testimonies of the Society of Friends, prepared by a committee of the yearly meetings now in correspondence, has been read before our meeting and being deliberately considered was unitedly and fully approved as embracing a concise declaration of the doctrines held by the Society of Friends, and the clerk is directed to sign this minute and attach the same to the document. Job S. Gidley, Clerk.
Going back to what I said earlier, in our meetings for business, a topic is raised, and friends are expected and try to consider the topic prayerfully and to speak, if anything, they feel is coming from the Lord on that topic. The clerk makes notes on what is said, and as time goes on, if it, as I said earlier, if it seems that there is unity there, then the clerk will try to summarize that unity. And that the word unity is very important. It is not unanimity. It is not consensus. It does not mean that the people there agreed with each other. It means that all the people there had the same sense of what Christ was telling them. And when the clerk has a sense of the meeting, when the clerk perceives that unity has been achieved, the clerk does his or her best to write that down as a minute. The minute is read to those then assembled, who will correct it, comment on it, or eventually approve it. And at that time, then it is signed. It's an interesting process. Those of us who are used to it have no trouble at all sitting quietly while it takes a minute or two or three for the clerk to go through the process of trying to compose this minute. It's really interesting to observe that behavior, that we are all just sitting, waiting expectantly. But at any rate, the minute then has been read and approved at that time. So at the next meeting, it's quite possible that and in fact, it's typical that the minutes from the previous meeting will be read, but they have already been approved. So when we have a business meeting and the minutes from the previous business meeting are read, then we don't wait for a motion to approve the minutes and so on and so forth. They were approved at the time by the people who were there.
As you see here in this first sentence, there is a date. It goes first day, the 9th of 6th month, 1912. This is what we call plain language. The earliest friends were very concerned that they wanted to be honest in every way, and they thought that we should not be using the names of the days of the week that basically go back to ancient gods and goddesses. You know, the sun god, moon day, Monday is a moon day, Tuesday, the god Tu, T-I-U, Woden's day, or Odin's day is Wednesday, Thor's day, Thor, Fry was a goddess, and then Saturn day. All these gods and goddesses, they felt it was inappropriate to use these names since they did not believe in any of these gods or goddesses. So they numbered the days, and first day would be Sunday, and so forth. So Saturday would be seventh day. Likewise with the months, January through December, each month would be numbered 1 through 12. Again, since you have names of gods there, Mars and whatnot, and other Roman Caesars, and even months that had numbers in Latin, but they don't correspond to today's numbers. So they numbered them 1 through 12. Actually, this habit became more widespread today that we do number these months. If you write numbers 12 for 2023 would be December the 4th, 2023. So some of this took off in the wider English-speaking world. I should say in other languages too. I know in Chinese, they just number their months and they number their days. In other languages, partially ancient and modern Greek, and in some of the Slavic languages, some of the months are just numbered, or days are numbered. However, there may be some confusion there because some of them do begin with Monday being day 1. So but this isn't something totally novel to friends.
And the days of the week, again, going back to Genesis, the days of the week were numbered. And then following all the way through from that, Jesus was raised from the dead on the first day of the week. So the Bible doesn't contain anything other than numbers to refer to days. Occasionally it uses names for months, but often the months are also numbered.
Again, you see this expression in correspondence. As I said earlier, those who are in agreement in their theology and ways of actions, behavior, conduct. And again, deliberately considered, again, through deliberations, basically. And again, concise declaration. I want to emphasize that because we are looking at something very concise here. There are times when maybe in one sentence, a lot is being said in this work, but there have been pages or even chapters written on what that one sentence says. So just want to keep reminding folks about that. Okay, I think that's all I have to say here.
Minutes of the Canada Yearly Meeting. At Canada Yearly Meeting of Friends held at Pickering, Ontario, by adjournments from the 21st day of 6th month to the 25th day of the same, inclusive 1912. A brief synopsis of the Principles of the Society of Friends, compiled by agreement and the joint action of the 7 yearly meetings in correspondence with each other, viz. Ohio, Iowa, North Carolina, New England, Kansas, Western, and Canada yearly meetings, was read, and Friends of Canada Yearly Meeting, now in session, uniting with the same, as a good exposition of some of the most important truths believed by us, we endorse the document as being in accord with what we have been taught by the Spirit of Truth. And the clerks are directed to place such endorsement on the document and forward to the yearly meeting to be held first subsequent to this. Signed by direction of the meeting, Benjamin J. Wood, Marianne Richardson, clerks.
Now, the reason that there are 2 clerks mentioned here is because at that time, the practice of women and men having separate business meetings was still in effect. From the very beginning, one of the things that Friends proclaimed, which was considered heretical by most Christians around them, was that women and men had equal gifts in ministry, in spiritual gifts. But it was also understood that women and men had to deal with in their meetings of discipline, which is what we call business meetings now, were different. And just as Henry has often pointed out, that the first Christians had this deep commitment to being holy in all ways. Beginning Quakers had the same sense. So their meetings for discipline often dealt with ways in which one friend or another may have not quite lived up to what was hoped for, and also business issues. And it was felt that it would be better for women and men to deal with their issues separately. But then when there was something of general nature, there were messengers that would go back and forth from the 2 sides of the meeting house, which were separated by partitions called shutters, so that the women knew what the men had decided, the men knew what the women had decided, and that then there could be unity between the two meetings. But that's why we have a man clerk and a woman clerk.
Yeah, I want to just point out something here throughout the work, that when friends here are talking about friends, they are talking about conservative friends. You won't find that word conservative or Wilburite here, because they're saying the same thing when they are saying in correspondence, that they all agree. And again, they are trying hard to conserve the original beliefs, testimonies, testaments, everything. Trying to see what was it that I was looking for here. Oh, the word discipline. Discipline in older English had the same meaning it has in modern English, but it also had an earlier meaning that was in the Latin word. Disciplina, or disciplina, is a Latin word that means a teaching. That's basically what it means. A disciple is someone who's being taught, a student, discipulus. And so it's important to think of that word discipline not only in a more modern sense, but also in terms of trying to protect the original teachings of Christianity, of friends. Okay, the spirit of truth. This is a reference basically to our understanding of Christ. I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus said. That Holy Spirit within Christ Jesus, within Messiah Jesus, says, I am truth. I am eternal truth. I am ultimate truth. And this is the spirit of truth that we see as our Messiah, that Messiah that can teach us, that we have been taught by the spirit of truth. This spirit of truth, this Messiah, this Christ, this anointed one is within us. This anointing, this unction is within everyone, although it may not be even known to that person, but it's the basic belief of friends that that true unction, that anointing with the Holy Spirit is there, at least initially as a seed. And that's a word that friends frequently have used in their writings throughout the centuries. So again, the spirit of truth is the Messiah, is the anointed one, which is what Christ means, anointed. He's had the spirit of truth poured into him. So I think that's an important phrase there.
Minutes of the Ohio Yearly Meeting. At Ohio Yearly Meeting of Friends held at Stillwater near Barnesville, Ohio, by adjournments from the 28th of 9th month to the 3rd of the 10th month inclusive, 1912. A brief synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Society of Friends, prepared by a conference of delegates from the yearly meetings in correspondence and referred to this meeting by the Meeting for Sufferings, was read and deliberately considered by this and women's meetings, united with and approved as a satisfactory statement of the doctrines of the gospel as professed by early friends, and in which we fully believe. The document is referred to the Meeting for Sufferings for publication in conjunction with the other Meetings for Sufferings, if approved by all the yearly meetings within the circle of our correspondence, with authority to make such emendations as they may deem proper. The meeting directs that the foregoing minute be forwarded in connection with the document to the ensuing yearly meetings. Signed by direction of the meeting, Jonathan Binns, Eliza H. McGrew, Clerks.
And I'll comment on this word emendations, which I only learned recently myself. Basically means correcting typos and minor grammatical errors.
That's different from amendment, starting with the letter A.
Which would be a change of the content or the meaning.
Okay. Also, I just want to point out here in the second paragraph towards the end where it says, approved as a satisfactory statement of the doctrines of the gospel as professed by early friends and in which we fully believe. Again, doctrine is goes back to another Latin word, doctrina, which means teaching. It's related to the word doctor, which means a teacher. So the teachings of the gospel as professed by early friends. You will see again and again what conservative meetings were trying to do was to conserve those original understandings, beliefs in what they understood in early Christianity, and in which we fully believe. So again, that's just a point here I want to point out, because of course you had all these schisms happening, especially in the 19th century, because of outside worldly influences. The Hicksites, with that separation in 1828, were heavily influenced by deism, which was a philosophy that was very powerful and prevalent at the end of the previous century, beginning of the 19th century, and in many ways today. I don't want to get into that at the moment, but also with regard to the Gurneyites, the Gurney separation, there was this emphasis on going back to forms and rites and rituals and a different, more literalist kind of interpretation of the Bible that you found in the writings of the Gurneyites. The Gurneyites eventually became what are known today as pastoral, or on the other hand, evangelical yearly meetings. So you have FUM folks and Evangelical Friends United meeting people, and on the other side of them is the evangelical friends.
Could I just ask about this phrase "by adjournments"? It's appeared a couple of times already, and I suspect the word adjournment here doesn't mean perhaps what we might use it for now.
Well, actually, yes. What it means is the meeting is temporarily suspended to be resumed at a future time. So again, even now when we adjourn a meeting, we adjourn this meeting to such and such a date and time in the future. So it meant it was adjourned from day to day.
Minutes of Western Yearly Meeting. At Western Yearly Meeting of Friends, held at Sugar Grove near Plainfield, Hendricks County, Indiana, by adjournments from the 7th to the 10th of 10th month, 1912. A document prepared at a conference of delegates appointed by the Meetings for Sufferings of the Yearly Meetings of the Religious Society of Friends in America, now in correspondence, entitled A Brief Synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Society of Friends, has been read at this time. After a season of careful consideration, this meeting fully unites with the document in its representation of the doctrines of the Christian religion as professed by early friends. The subject is referred to a representative meeting for further care in its publication. The clerks are directed to endorse on behalf of this meeting a suitable extract of this minute and attach to the document. Luna O. Stanley, Anna F. Harvey, clerks. Was there anything particular that either of you wanted to comment on this one, or should we move to the next?
I don't see anything in particular that we haven't already mentioned here.
I've just seen a footnote that we've got by the text here by Western, which is a reminder it's the western half of Indiana. Minutes of the Iowa Yearly Meeting. At Iowa Yearly Meeting of Friends, held at West Branch, Cedar County, Iowa, commencing with a meeting for worship on the 16th and that for business on the 17th of the 10th month, and continuing by adjournments to the 21st day of the same, inclusive 1912. A document entitled A Brief Synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Societies of Friends, which had been prepared by a conference of representatives from the different meetings for sufferings within our circle of correspondence, was read at this time, and being deliberately and weightily considered, was fully approved, and this meeting directs its clerks to sign this minute and attach it to the aforesaid document. And it is referred to the meeting for sufferings for their care in publishing it when it is approved by all the yearly meetings with which we correspond. James E. Gooden, Mary B. Henderson.
One thing I'd like to point out is this word principles. I think this is an important word, even more so in earlier English. It goes back to a Latin word, actually two roots there, that prin, the prin, is a corruption of the Latin word primus, which means first. And the CIP there is another root that means take. It's what you take first. Those most important aspects of something are, and that's what principle referred to. Those beliefs, those understandings, those meanings, those are principles. Those are, it's again a stronger meaning in earlier English than today, but I think we can understand that here. Conrad?
Well, one thing is that a lot of these minutes say that we agree that these are the principles and testimonies of early friends, but also it implies friends today as well. It's not as if we're saying, yeah, this is a correct history book. No, this is what we believe now, the same as what was believed before.
And indirectly, they're saying, you know, what liberal meetings or evangelical, pastoral, Quaker meetings, their beliefs are not those of early friends. And actually, there were times when some of those friends would actually say, no, we don't believe, for instance, in the light of Christ within us as a primary guide. I'm thinking of someone named Updegraff in the 19th century. So you know, you read these words here, and there are a lot of sort of other meanings that may not be apparent at first if you're not familiar with the history.
Minutes of the Kansas Yearly Meeting. At Kansas Yearly Meeting of Friends, held at Spring River, Kansas, by adjournments from the 25th of 10th month to the 30th of the same, inclusive, 1912. The document entitled A Brief Synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Religious Society of Friends, prepared by a conference of delegates from the yearly meetings in correspondence with each other, has been read in joint session of men and women friends of this meeting. On deliberate consideration, it is the judgment of this meeting that the document contains a concise statement of the principles and testimonies of the Society of Friends, unites with the same, and directs its clerks to sign the above minute on behalf of the yearly meeting. Hannah E. Bowles, Levi Bowles, clerks.
Again, concise. You know, again, concise, brief, short. You know, this is what this document is. And there's so much more sometimes behind a simple statement, and that would have been understood by those friends who wrote up this document and for those for whom it was written. But I think sometimes we ourselves need to understand that and look a little more deeper, and learn more about what they really were saying here by looking at some of the earlier documents of earlier friends.
Minutes of the North Carolina Yearly Meeting. At North Carolina Yearly Meeting of Friends, held at Cedar Grove in the town of Woodland, Northampton County, North Carolina, by adjournments from the 2nd of 11th month to the 7th of the same, inclusive, 1912. The document, A Brief Synopsis of the Principles and Testimonies of the Society of Friends, was read in this yearly meeting. After a time of due deliberation, it was fully united with and is referred to a committee of the representative body, which is to aid similar committees of the other conservative yearly meetings in its publication and distribution. Albert W. Brown, Margaret F. Parker, clerks. And that is the last of the minutes.
Yes, that's good. We'll probably stop here, but I just want to point out here is the first time we've seen this word conservative. And conservative is in the understanding, not of a political understanding of conservative, but basically wanting to conserve, to preserve. When you see conserve, if you remember the word preserve, conservador in Spanish is the translation for a conservative friend when referring to conservative Quakers, and it still has that sense of a preserver, a conservator. That's the sense.
Yeah.
So,
or we use the word conservation with regard to wildlife and the environment and so on.
Yes.
Something that's good, which we try to protect and continue for the future.
Okay.
And it's important that you read the middle initials, because especially in Ohio yearly meeting, many people are related to each other. And if you don't know the middle initial, you're not sure which person is being referred to. Just a little idiosyncrasy that we have.
So we've come to the end of the direct presentation part. Were there any questions that anybody would like to ask Henry or Conrad?
As you explained the meaning of principles, I was wondering whether there is a good explanation for the meaning of testimonies.
Well, I can go back in etymology. I believe the basic root of that word is the same root as in the word testes. But it's the testimonies are what we testify to and hopefully what we are practicing. That's my understanding. I don't know if Conrad can.
Well, yes, and we give testimony in a court. It's a witness testifies. This is what I have seen. This is what I have heard. This is my own experience. And it's said, again, in a court, usually it's said under oath to ensure that it is truthful. Of course, we don't take oaths, but that's a different issue. But yeah, testimony, the statement of a witness.
Witness is the right word there, I think, in terms of understanding what we witness to. The Greek word originally was martyr, which gives us our English word martyr, but that originally meant a witness. However, so many people who are witnessing for Christ were martyred, were executed, that word had to begin to have a very different meaning in Greek and in English. That it's not only being a witness for Christ, but also being executed for one's belief and beliefs. So yes, witnesses, think of witness in its various senses here as to testimony.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
And you find this expression, principles and testimonies, variations of it, throughout Friends' writings, or earlier writings as well, right from the very beginning.
Yeah, in addition to the numbering the days of the week and the months of the year, there are many expressions that we use among ourselves that we call Quakerese that we often forget that others who speak English otherwise just as well as we do don't necessarily understand. So whenever that happens, if Henry or I says something that seems like a normal English word, but apparently with a different meaning, just let us know.
I myself, as do some other certain percentage of conservative friends, still or will use what is called plain language. That is the older English word or a form of it for referring to a single person, one person. The older words were thou and thee, thine, thy, and friends again wanted to make they were so honest, they did not want to use the plural form, you or ye, when referring to one person. They were so, how can I put it, sticklers for calling a spade a spade. And they understood there was a bit of ego in terms of calling someone by using a plural form. And this was a very important thing in England at this time, at least in southern England, London, whatever. In the north, there was still that emphasis on using what are called polite forms had not really taken hold of in the same sense. But today, actually, we've lost that singular form, the thou and thee, and thy and thine. But among conservative friends, you do find some of us, as myself, I will use it with conservative friends. I get confused myself at times, but I will say the word thou actually in among American Quakers has dropped out. We're using the form thee to mean both thou and thee, as in English, the word you is used both for the earlier ye as well as you. So the ye and the thou dropped out, but you may hear me saying that throughout these sessions here, using that. Again, I don't know what percentage of friends, conservative friends, will do that, but you'll hear it.
Thank you. Were there any final comments, Conrad or Henry, you'd like to make before we bring this session to a close?
No, I think we're off to a good start. I'm looking forward to getting into the meat of it.
That brings our session to a close. Thank you for joining us in the session or listening to the podcast. Until next time, goodbye.